What if the reason you feel lonely isn't because you are alone, but because the world feels so disconnected? Have you ever stood in a crowded room and still feel completely alone? Not physically alone, emotionally alone. And in a world that's more connected than ever, loneliness is rising, not falling. And here's what's even more confusing: you can be surrounded by many people, receive so many notifications, be in so many group chats, have so many family members, and still feel detached. Well, today, we're not just talking about being alone, we'll be talking about feeling emotionally disconnected in loud times. And if you're feeling alone quietly, I need you to stay with me because this episode is for you.
He placed this voice within me, and I'm answering his call. I choose light when life feels broken. I choose faith when hope feels small. This is my destiny to speak healing, hope, and love. Yeah, I've answered his call.
Welcome back to The Bad, the Ugly, the Good, and Healing You. I am your host, Dr. Jenita Griffin, also known as Doc G. This is a conversation about something that many people are experiencing, but not many people are talking about, and that is loneliness in loud times. I want to start with the bad. And the reason I'm starting with the bad is because I feel like many people today, they're in isolation. And although we're coming back from COVID, it doesn't look the same. It can look like being in a crowded room full of people and still feeling invisible, having that social anxiety, over talking in your head. It could look like being married but feeling misunderstood. It could look like having thousands of followers, but no one is calling to check on you and see if you're hurting or not. Modern loneliness is different. Modern loneliness has multiple layers, and most recently, COVID has added significant amount of loneliness coming from many different people unexpectedly. A lot of extroverts even are experiencing this. So let's get into it. I feel like digital proximity is one of the things that we are no longer connected. Digital proximity is more like emotional distance, and we are constantly connected to social media, and we are rarely emotionally present. Now, being connected behind a camera, being connected on social media is not the same as going down the street playing with your friend. It's not the same as being able to go to a neighbor's house or go out to a an event and be able to socially connect yourself and be able to have conversations. It's not the same. And I feel like COVID kind of stopped a lot of that for many of us, in a sense where if you were introvert before, COVID just kind of amplified it. I also hear a lot of extroverts. COVID kind of turned them inward, in not in the way that you think, in a way that some don't like people and they are okay with being isolated. But that's another kind of loneliness. Okay. It's one thing if you isolate yourself by choice, and that's one reason or another. That's a whole different topic within itself. But it's one thing to isolate yourself willingly, but it's another thing to want to connect to other people, but have a difficult time doing it because of the narrative and the internal dialogue that goes along in your head. I feel like social media has trained us to compare ourselves to so many different people. It has trained us to look at other people's lives, even though social media may not be accurate in a sense of how people are truly living, but this persona is kind of put out there, and many people who are genuine and honest, they are comparing themselves to many people who are out there presenting as though they have this elaborate life when they actually don't. So I feel like a lot of us are comparing ourselves instead of connecting with other people. We are also reacting instead of reflecting on, what it is that is going on with us. We are just reacting. So many people are angry nowadays. We are strolling, we are into social media, but we feel empty. There are several reasons that this is happening by way of social media. And a lot of times the nervous system doesn't register any belonging when you are actually connected with someone. There's eye contact, and this is proximity. Eye contact, there's tone, there's shared vulnerability, there is emotional safety in the dialogue within itself. We've seen to replace depth with visibility with social media. And the visibility is not intimate anymore. It's not showing the connection and the vulnerability that people once shared. There's also the hyper interdependence culture. Now, I feel like in current times, independence is celebrated a lot. And although, don't get me wrong, self empowerment, self improvement is definitely something that we want to continue to invest in ourselves in, self love. But it's taken to a whole different level with the interdependence. And this is when a lot of people say, that they don't need anyone or they can heal alone. They cut everyone off and they just kind of disconnect from so many different people, family members, even. But here's the thing, we are here to connect. Nobody gets anywhere alone. We are here to share, connect, and live life in connection with one another. I feel like most often hyper independence form from a lot of people who are participating in that movement of they don't need anyone and they can do it on their own and kind of estranging themselves from their families. There's a rise and an increase in that. Many young people are becoming estranged from their families in that they're cutting them off. And that's a movement that's happening and it's unfortunate, but I feel like a lot of that comes from childhood unresolved wounds. There has been things that I could think of like past betrayal, trauma in a person's life, people being disappointed. When you're disappointed over and over and over again, people tend to retreat. And most often a lot of people develop trust issues and they are fearful of being vulnerable. So what do? We protect ourselves from being hurt and we block access to that connection, and loneliness can be sort of like a barrier or a gate to kind of hide behind. Another thing that kind of contributes to loneliness in loud places is emotional exhaustion. We are living in a time where there is a lot of economic stress. There's social division. There is political tension, there is cultural instability. There is so much going on in today's age that a lot of people just rather not deal and they rather stay at home, order DoorDash, order groceries. They rather just disconnect from the world to protect themselves because our nervous systems are on alert and we become overwhelmed when we detach because we don't know how to cope. We begin to feel lonely in a sense of experiencing emotional numbness, and we avoid and become irritable, and the world seems angry. So many people seem angry, and I feel like this is what's happening, and we need to look at how we can turn this narrative around for humanity, or we're going to just end up going in a dark, dark direction. We're going to wind up going into a space where it's going to be sort of like, if it's not already, every man for themselves. And we're going to really be in a twilight zone. We have to look at turning around this narrative, the emotional exhaustion that many of us feel because we're tired. This is something that we have to look at how we can cope differently. How can we share the load, ask for help? And that's where a lot of therapists come in, where they can support you. I'm pro therapy. I know you know this by now, but I just say that to say that this is something that is increasing loneliness, and we need to look at how we can go about changing it. Emotional exhaustion doesn't just affect you individually, it can sometimes affect our marriages. When we are depleted, we don't show up emotionally. We're there, but not there. We don't show up emotionally. And over time, that can start to feel like loneliness. Loneliness is not just affecting people who are single. Some of the deepest loneliness happens inside of marriages. And yes, you can be married and still feel alone. You can share a bed, you can share children, you can share a house, you can share the everyday schedule together, and you can still feel alone. People still feel alone in marriages. I feel like loneliness in marriages doesn't often look dramatic as if you're socially isolated or withdrawn. You're there. It looks like having the conversations that stay surface level, they're not intimate. It shows itself by you feeling unheard or unseen, or you're living like partners or roommates, even. I've been married for 27 years. And at one point in time in my marriage, and I'm sure he did too, I felt lonely in my marriage. And it just felt like we were partners. We were just doing the same things over and over and over again, like Groundhog's Day, getting up, getting the kids together, getting them off to school, going to work, and coming home. And we avoided having those deep conversations, that connection, that deep intimacy that we had was not there. And for a long period of time, it felt like we were roommates. We were just partners in raising the children. And we had to learn how to reconnect. What makes feeling lonely in a marriage even more confusing, you start to ask yourself, how am I married and I'm lonely? You ask yourself those questions. Why do I feel lonely and I'm married? And truth be told, loneliness isn't about proximity. It's all about emotional connection. The person can be there, but not there. And you can be physically in proximity to one another, but you can be emotionally miles apart. And I say that to say that Sometimes loneliness in marriage develops slowly over time, and especially when you have young children, because that's when a routine is developed most. And it's about caring for the children, that survival thing, so to speak. It can be the parenting demands, the chronic stress, unresolved conflict between one another, avoided resentment, technology replacing the conversations with one another, emotional burnout, working, or one partner working numerous hours and another partner is not. You're kind of doing things alone and you're in it alone. And so I say that to say that you're in survival mode and you're feeling alone in your marriage. And here's the part that most couples don't talk about, and that is loneliness in marriage often feels like rejection, even when it actually is truly about disconnection. And when disconnection goes unaddressed, it leads to resentment. And not just because the love is gone, it's more so because the safety is no longer there. The safety has reduced. And don't get me wrong, I want to clarify this. Loneliness in marriages do not automatically mean that the marriage is over. It doesn't mean to go to divorce court. It just means that the loneliness is just a signal that emotional intimacy needs attention. And emotional intimacy requires vulnerability, it requires curiosity instead of defense and people being defensive and always on guard. It requires a person turning inward and talking about their deep inner connections, their inner things that are going on instead of just shutting down and pushing the other person away. And the truth is that these are things that sometimes people stay quietly about in the marriage because they feel guilty about it. They feel guilty about being married and feeling lonely. But I tell you that naming it is the first step in bringing it to your awareness with your spouse, because it's not betrayal, it's awareness. And awareness is the beginning of you reconnecting and repairing what's going on in your marriage. And now, if that part resonates with you, I want you to stay with me, okay? Because loneliness in marriage is not solved by proximity. It's healed by the connection, the intimacy, the vulnerability. And what we talked about is what I'm going to elaborate more on in episode 12. We're going to talk about how to slow down and unpack the loneliness in your marriage. So, for those of you who may be experiencing loneliness and you are married, tune into episode 12 to where we can kind of unpack that. And I also want you to think about a question before you enter episode 12. Okay, I want you to ask yourself, are you lonely or are you just bored? There is a difference. And the solution and how you deal with it is about you knowing the truth. So before you get to that episode, I want you to think about, are you lonely or are you just bored in the marriage? So that when you do hear the dialogue about in episode 12, you would have a better understanding and awareness about your truth and what you're truly feeling so that you can look at how you can go about repairing that. There's something else that we can't ignore when we talk about loneliness in the current times. And I want to say that is the pandemic. Whether you realize it or not, the pandemic has changed how we relate to one another. I feel like for months or even years, many of us experienced the physical isolation, the limited touch. We experienced reduced social interaction. We had this fear about being in proximity to someone else, and that, we were told to keep our distances and we were told to look at our health and keeping that distance. Many people had grief without closure. They had disrupted routines, suspended community events. Weddings were canceled. There were funerals that were limited. I think like only 10 people can attend a funeral. There was churches that closed, so you weren't able to connect and have that spiritual connection that we once had before the pandemic. Schools were virtual, and that's where a lot of our kids became socially inept, if you will. The social anxiety developed for many of our kids. Work became remote to where a lot of people, are working from home. People are still working from home. And it's something that happened subtly, but something powerful happened in that process. Our nervous system had learned the distance. And for a long time, closeness meant danger, caused you to contract COVID and impede with your health. And there was potential illness and there was the uncertainty and fear that many of us had, and our nervous system adapted to this. And so I feel like many people have become accustomed to staying at home, limiting the contact, socializing through social media and the screens through Zoom, and minimizing that emotional exposure. We were able to hide behind a lot of the things, and that adaptation became very powerful, and that safety was restricted for many of us. And when that was lifted, many of us didn't know how to bounce back. People became comfortable with being isolated. And so when the restrictions were lifted, some people never really returned back to going into the crowds. Some friendships faded, and many people, didn't reconnect with friends they once had. Some relationships weakened under the pressure. Many people divorced during the pandemic, and some people realized that they didn't know how to re engage and socialize with people. This created problems, and many people lost social skills. And just like anything else, if you don't use it, you lose it. Many people's social skills abilities weakened because there was no consistency in socializing and networking, and you weren't able to get out and touch someone. During that isolation, many people lost these skills. They lost the conversational rhythm. They lost the comfort with being vulnerable. They lost the tolerance for disagreements. You were able to disagree and agree to disagree, and now it's become worse. And the ease of this spontaneous reaction, the small talk even, become over exhaustive for many people who went back to the crowds, or back to having to go back to work, or back to having to socialize once the sanctions were lifted. Crowds begin feeling like they were overstimulating, and even phone calls felt exhausting, so to speak, for many people, because it became more of an effort for them to call people and have those conversations once the pandemic restrictions were lifted. And when the connection feels effortful, people became lonely, and the loneliness increased, and many people just rather not deal, and they started to isolate and not reconnect with people. And our children, to be honest, our children, I see so many more children who have developed what is called social anxiety. And it's sad because many of our children don't know how to socialize. I feel like before, when the technology started with social media before the pandemic, and people were connecting with other people via internet, and children were playing video games, and that's how they socialized. And I feel like that was already bad enough. And then the pandemic happened where it increased more of that. And our children, they are struggling to connect with other kids, and they're struggling to socialize. And Just like I spoke about in the grief series, many people experienced it and they were never able to fully process these losses that they had. The pandemic created collective grief for many of us, and some people lost loved ones, some people lost jobs, some people lost their identity, even. Some people lost the normalcy of every day. And many people, truth be told, who were extroverts and they craved for that when the pandemic happened and they isolated or they weren't able to socialize in those connections and have that socializing atmosphere, they started to turn inward and became introverts, where a lot of people did not recover, and much of their isolation has become loneliness, and it's a problem. So when I say that to say during the pandemic, there was no space to process all of this. And all of that developed into a loss where grief was unprocessed and it turned into emotional numbness. And emotional numbness can look like detachment, and detachment can look like independence. But underneath, it's often sadness and loneliness. And as a result, there has been a shift towards the digital comfort and people being more comfortable through social media. For many, the digital connection became the primary form of interaction, where the Zoom has replaced offices and text replaced touch and streaming replaced gatherings. And while technology keep us in touch and functioning, it does not replace belonging and that connection that we as human beings need. Okay. I feel like screens provide just the stimulation. They don't provide the nervous system to regulate. And you can attend 5 virtual meetings and you can attend these in one day and still feel completely alone. Many people have become alone, and that is attributed to much of the pandemic. And now, with the aftermath, we have, since the world has reopened, we have people who experience the anxiety. They feel socially rusty. They feel that many people are being emotionally cautious, if you will. They're less patient. Many people, I feel like, are more irritable nowadays, and they're less tolerant than what it was before. They're quicker to withdraw and denounce people, if you will, and say that they don't like people anymore. And it's sad. And I feel like some people have learned that they just don't like being around people. And some friendships have resolved during that time. They were never rebuilt. And so many families fractured under this stress. And some people quietly decided that it's easier just to stay to themselves. But I feel like isolation that begins as protection can become loneliness over time. And it just becomes a gate in a sense. And it's a gate that many people form around themselves to where they have difficulty getting out. So let me ask you something. Did you lose a connection during the pandemic that you never fully grieved? Or did you grow used to solitude and have difficulty re engaging and connecting with other people now? Did the distance become comfortable for you that you feel so comfortable you don't know how to break free of that? You adapted to survive uncertainty, but this adaptation doesn't have to become permanent detachment. And this is where Loneliness has become layered in a sense because now we're not just dealing with it, we're dealing with personal attachment wounds, we're dealing with family detachment, we're dealing with culture hyper independent primary dependence. We're also dealing with a world that has trained us for a season at the very least to stay apart. And when detachment becomes normalized, connection can start to feel unfamiliar. Okay, before we go any further, I want to show you what loneliness can sound like in the inside. Not when you are alone, but when you are surrounded by many people. This is what the internal detachment, the internal dialogue can feel like in real time. So stay tuned.
The long self. I should go say something. They look welcoming.
The guarded self. What would you even say?
Just ask how they're doing.
And then what? What if it gets awkward?
I'm tired of standing here alone.
You're not alone. You're just observing.
No, I feel alone. They're laughing. They seem connected.
You don't belong in that circle.
That's not true.
Remember the last time you tried? It felt forced.
I just want someone to notice me.
And risk rejection?
What if I just send a text later instead?
That's safer.
I don't want safe. I want connection.
And that there is the internal tug of war, that internal conflict. It's not always about lacking people, it's about battling the fear while craving those connections. It's about wanting to reach out and connect with someone, but feeling frozen. It's about standing in a crowded room and feeling invisible inside of your own body. Now, that's not weakness, that's your nervous system trying to protect you from vulnerability. But protection can slowly become isolation. Now, here is the ugly part of it. The ugly part of it is that loneliness often triggers shame. People think to themselves, what's wrong with me? Why can't I have deeper connections? Or even, why can they connect with other people, but I can't? People often go about asking these questions inside of their head, but loneliness is not a character flaw, it's just a signal. And sometimes it's rooted in attachment patterns. If you grew up in a household where you were emotionally unseen, or were dismissed or parentified, even, or you had inconsistent caregiving, you may have learned to not ask for things. You may have learned to not expect things. And you may have learned to not to need too much, but to settle with less than. So you shrink your needs. And then you feel lonely when they're not met. Loneliness increases when you avoid depth. It feels safer to talk about things on the surface level. It feels safer to keep conversations light, but intimacy requires risk without vulnerability. Having that lack of deep connection, that is not fulfilling for an individual at all. So even if you have lack of deep connections with some people, you do want to have connections with someone. And if you're not getting that and that need is not being met somewhere, that leads to loneliness. Oftentimes, this illusion to be strong, there is an illusion about being strong. I feel like many people who are strong are lonely because they're the ones that everyone leans on. They're the ones who fix it all. They're the ones who people come and talk to. They're the ones who are burned out. Sometimes loneliness isn't about lack of people, it's about lack of being known, lack of being heard, or lack of being considered. So take some time to answer some questions for me. I want you to answer, when was the last time someone asked you how you were feeling and told you the truth? When was the last time You allowed someone to see your real emotional state. So I want you to ask the question, are you lonely or are you guarded? I feel like sometimes loneliness isn't about who's missing, it's about who we won't let in. But here's the good part, and finally, at the good, loneliness is reversible. Just like with anxiety, avoiding, loneliness is reversible in that you are asked to explore, you are asked to participate, you are asked to encourage yourself to engage in interactions intentionally. It requires intentional connection, not just about proximity. I want to give you some steps to reconnect with yourself first because here's the thing, some loneliness is internal. I want you to ask yourself, am I emotionally available to myself? Do I know what I'm feeling? Do I sit with my emotions or distract from them? I feel like self disconnection often precedes relational disconnection. So you have to be in tune with yourself in order to figure out what's going on with you and understand you in order to be able to see where you are lacking in order to relate to others. Step two, practice micro vulnerability. You don't have to overshare. You don't have to do any of that. I want you to start with small steps. Start with small talk. When a person asks you how you're doing, instead of saying, I'm fine, say things like, it's been a heavy week. Instead of saying things like, I'm good, say things like, I'm trying to process a lot of things. Connections grow with honesty. So start being vulnerable and intentionally making intentions to talk a little more in depth about how you're really feeling. Step three, regulate before you relate. If your nervous system is dysregulated, connection feels unsafe. I want you to practice slow breathing. I want you to limit the news intake, right? I want you to reduce digital overload. I want you to reduce social media. Look at grounding exercises. Look at calming yourself because the calmness creates a capacity for closeness. Step four, choose depth over volume. You don't need more conversations. One safe conversation is more healing than 20 shallow or superficial ones. Step five, accept connection takes effort. In current times, I feel like deep relationships won't happen accidentally. They require follow up, they require consistency, they require being intentional, they require time. Loneliness decreases when effort increases. Earlier, we heard an internal battle of someone standing in a crowded room, wanting connection but feeling frozen. Now, let's revisit the same room, the same people, the same environment, but something inside has shifted. Stay tuned.
The longing self. I want to go over there.
The regulated self. Okay,
I feel nervous.
that makes sense. New conversations can feel vulnerable.
What if it's awkward?
Awkward doesn't mean unsafe.
What if they don't respond well?
Then we'll survive it.
My chest feels tight.
Take one breath. You don't have to be impressive, just be present.
I don't want to stand here alone again.
You're not alone. I'm with you.
Okay, I'll just say hello.
That's enough.
Notice the difference. The anxiety didn't disappear, the room didn't change, but the internal dialogue has shifted. Healing didn't remove the vulnerability, it removed the shame of it all. The healed version didn't become fearless, they became self supported. And sometimes that's all growth looks like. No boldness, no steadiness. We've heard the internal battle, we heard the healed internal shift. Now let's see what happens when they actually walk over. Stay tuned for the third skit.
The longing self. Okay, just say hello. Hey, how are y'all doing?
Voice of group. Oh, hey, we're good. What's your name again?
I'm Jenna.
Oh, right, nice to see you.
See? It's awkward. They don't really care.
It's just a normal interaction.
So, what are y'all talking about?
You could leave now.
Or we can stay a little longer.
This isn't magical, but it's not scary either. I'm okay.
Did you notice what happened? There was no dramatic transformation, no instant belonging, no movie moment connection, just a human interaction. And sometimes healing looks like just showing up. It looks like just tolerating a little discomfort or even just staying present and staying alert and not necessarily abandoning yourself mid conversation or fleeing or avoiding the conversation in general. Loneliness doesn't always disappear in one brave moment, but I feel like isolation begins to loosen its grip when you prove to yourself that you can survive connection. We've seen the internal battle, we've seen the first brave hello. Now let's fast forward to the same room, but this time there's something different. And this time it's looking like I'm the one that is being noticed in the room. Okay? So stay tuned. You see, healing reaches its highest point when you become what you've once needed. Loneliness transforms when you become brave enough to just create connections, not just wait for them. What happens psychologically across these three versions, these three skits that we've seen? In version one, the nervous system was operating from fear. So social interaction felt like threat. The person wanted to flee, right? In version two, the nervous system was regulated where the person kind of set in it. The fear was acknowledged, but the person didn't obey that fear. In version three, the brain gathered new evidence. The person survived. I survived. That's what's called corrective experience. In the future version, the attachment system becomes secure enough to initiate connection. That's growth. That's personality change. That's regulation. Put yourself intentionally front and center to calm yourself to get through socializing and connecting with people. In closing, if you've been feeling lonely, I want you to hear this. You are not broken. You're not behind. You're not unworthy. You are living in emotionally overloaded times. And because of that, it makes sense that connections feel harder. But isolation does not have to be permanent. I want you to ask yourself tonight, where in my life can I replace performance with presence? Where can I choose honesty over protection? Where can I let someone know me, even just a little bit? And so I ask you this, are you truly alone? Or have you just been surviving by staying unseen and staying away from people? Healing doesn't begin when you suddenly have more people around you. It begins when you allow yourself to be known. It begins when you acknowledge it. So before we close, I just want to kind of say really quick, I want you to know this conversation doesn't end here, okay? I'm going to be continuing this loneliness series. In episode 10, I'm going to be talking about loneliness in kids and why social skills feel harder in this generation. In episode 11, we're going to be talking with young adults and this social media culture and how you can be digitally connected and emotionally detached at the same time. And of course, as I mentioned before in episode 12, we're going to be slowing down and unpacking loneliness inside the marriage and what it sounds like, what it turns into, and how you can reconnect with your spouse. Because loneliness looks different at every stage of life. And I feel like healing always begins with awareness and naming it. And we're going to go deeper in the next episodes, okay? So I want to thank you for sitting with me in this conversation. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. If you know someone who is struggling with loneliness, share the series with them. I want you to share my link with them. I want you to spread the news, okay? I am Dr. Jenita Griffin, also known as Doc G, and this is the bad, the ugly, the good, and healing you. Love you, be good to you, and expect great things for you. Until next time.